Hi everyone, and welcome to the tutorial series for the Animal Behavior Kit. In this video, let's go ahead and take a look at the new improvement to the population control in the 1.3 update. Specifically, three main things that have been added to the system. In my opinion, the biggest one is right here. You can now specify the ratio between male and female per species. Really cool. It actually came from a request from one of the community members on Discord, and I thought it was a great addition. Before this, the spawner would automatically do half and half, half male, half female. But obviously, in some species, you may want to have maybe more females than males or vice versa, based on what you want. So that's a really nice addition. I've also added a check for nearby players to the spawners. If you saw the video on the animal spawners, you'll see that this was also added there. And again, you can see probably the theme here. These are just general improvements to open world games. If the player is nearby a spawn location, we don't want the animal to spawn there, because then it may just make it really obvious that the animals are just, spawning from thin air, right? And finally, this is again for convenience. You can now auto-populate the spawners per species, again similar to the animal spawners, but this is different. This is using the species tag, and we'll see all of that in just a second. So let's go ahead and jump into Unreal, and let's take a look at how to use the male to female ratio option here. So we go back here, and if you've been following along, you know that we have our little test level here where we're testing all the new features. And right here, you see that I have a population control blueprint in the middle, and I've added two animal spawners, right? And right here, what I've done is I've created, under this test folder, two new deer classes. And all this is a buck and a doe, and they both have a natural death component. They're going to die between 30 to 60 seconds each. It's going to be within this range. And they have the population control component, which basically auto-registers them to the system, so we can now keep track of how many of these deer are actually in the scene, right? That's pretty much it. And here under the details, I'm doing a check every 10 seconds, and I'm balancing every turn. And for the species detail, I've added the species, which is deer, between 10 to 20 species, right? The minimum population is 10, max is 20. And right here is the new feature, male to female ratio, and these are ratios. Every one male, we want one female. So the X is male and the Y is female. And then we have the spawners automatically added here. And then we have the classes, male and female classes. We've seen that before. And if you haven't seen this, this was added in 1.2, so please go back and check the tutorial for that. But now we have calling details here, which means that you can select which animals are killed when the spawner is going through the population. By default, it'll kill the oldest animal first, and it will kill the animal if it's not engaged. Again, that is because if the animal is engaged, then something is happening, right? The animal is either attacking somebody else or being attacked or fleeing or hiding, and we don't want the animal to be killed if it's engaging with the player, for example, right? There's also the option to kill the animal only if it's inactive. Again, just to make sure that the animal is not called or killed while the player is in the area, right? So animal goes inactive using the proximity system, and then at that point it can get called by the population control system. So play around with these settings to find really the best solution for your game, but just know that these options are here as well. So all right, enough talking. Let's go ahead and hit play here. And remember, I have 10 seconds, which means that we gotta wait 10 seconds before the initial check from the system, and you'll see that it's going to go ahead and spawn. You can see there are 10 deer. You can see species, minimum and maximum, and you can see that right now we spawned 5 males and 5 females. That's because our ratio was 1 to 1. So if we come back here and say, actually, I want the ratio to be 1 to 2, for every male I want 2 females, just to make it an example. Here can be anything really. Then you'll see that now we're going to spawn less males and more females. And this can be anything, 2 to 3, 5 to 6, whatever ratio you desire, it'll go ahead and work. you can see that we have 3 males to 7 females. So obviously there's some rounding going on depending on the ratio, but it's going to try to approximate it as close as possible to what you want. And if we wait here a little longer, another 10 seconds, you'll see that now we're going to get another 10 more deer spawned, and you should see those numbers go up in the same ratio, right? So let's just give it a second here to do the next spawning. Oh, that's right. Sorry. It's not going to spawn because we have the minimum, which is 10. That's the reason why. If I started killing deer, then the next time it will spawn again. As you can see, some deer died based on the natural death component. And now we have, you see a lot of males are dying. Now we have 6 deer. And now you can see that the spawner has automatically added more. Again, to match it to 10. That's right. So the reason it did not spawn is because we met the minimum quota, right? The 10 deer in the environment. So it's going to keep checking on this frequency, but if the population is within the minimum, the maximum, then it's obviously not going to do anything, right? That was the reason. All right, so that's pretty much it. You can play with the ratios here. If we go back to our slide, now this is the second thing, which is really neat. Spawners can now check for nearby players. This is off by default. I want you guys to enable it consciously. I want you to do it because that's really what you want to do, right? And you can see that there's an option here, player check details. Go ahead and expand it. And it's as simple as checking this Boolean here and adding a check radius, right? So I'm going to make the radius really small. Oops. Maybe like 1,000. And I'm going under debug and I'm going to select debug player check so we can see the trace. It's going to be a sphere trace. And we're going to go ahead and hit play here. And you'll see the trace. I'm going to maximize this. You'll see that it's going to do a trace. And then it's going to decide if the player is not detected within the trace. You see the trace there. It'll go ahead and spawn the deer. Right? If the player is detected, then at that point it will not spawn. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger, like, I don't know, 3,000. And just to make this a little more interesting, let's make this, I don't know, 40, between 40 and 50. And let's go ahead and hit play. And we're gonna be near this spawner right here. And you'll see that it's gonna do the sphere trace and it's gonna make sure that it doesn't spawn any animals near us. As you can see, it spawned all of the animals over there. No animals here because it just traced and detected that the player was here. So obviously, even that 3,000 is really, really small. So I would suggest making this bigger. By default, I added 10,000. And in your game, you would obviously have a lot more spawners all over your world. And remember, the more spawners you have per species, it's going to pick random spawns for every single class. Every single animal is going to pick a random spawn. So the more you have around the world, the more variety and the more organically it's gonna spawn around your level, right? So this becomes really, really handy if you want to make sure that they spawn in areas that are deserted, there are no players there. All right. And the last thing is you can now auto-populate the spawners. So for example, right now we only have 2 spawners. But I could easily have more. For example, let's just duplicate this guy right here, right? And the way I would do it is if I wanted these 4 spawners to be used for the deer, and remember I can add as many species as I want, I would have to come here into the species spawners and manually add them. You can either use the drop down. In this case, it's easy, but normally in your level, if you have dozens and dozens, you would have to go physically to the location. Then you use the little eyedropper here. You have to select it there, and that's the way you would do it manually, right? But what I've done is I'm going to go ahead and delete the species spawners. Is that now if you go to the spawner itself, you'll notice that there's a new species tag here, as well as a display name. And the display name, by the way, is just as a helping. It's not going to be in the game. It's just for you to realize what should be there. So if I go ahead and put deer, well, you can put whatever text you want there. And then for species, we would want to match to the species that we want, which is deer. And now because the name is deer, the species here is deer, and the species in our population control is deer, we can now go ahead, you can see that we have no spawners here. We can now go ahead all the way down and click on populate spawners, and it'll go ahead and search your scene, and you can see that it has added all of the spawners that are for the deer. And I can prove that if I come here and say, actually, I don't want this to be deer, I want this to be, I don't know, spider, for species spider. And I go back to the population control, and I'm going to, you see, no, the species spawner has been removed, and I go down and say populate spawners. You see that now we only have 3, because the one for the spider wasn't picked up, right? So ideally, the way you would do this is you would put all your spawners, you would select the species that you want for your spawner, the display text, you'll put them all around the world. Then finally, you'll come to your population control, you add all of your species, so you make sure that the species name matches, and then without having to worry about this array here, you would just come down and press the button once, and everything would be set up automatically for you. Really, really handy, again, for big open world games where you're going to have dozens, maybe hundreds of spawners all over the world. This is going to save you a lot of time. All right, so that is pretty much it for the population control. Again, the ratio, you can do it per species. You can now have some additional calling options. Again, play around with that. You have the player check, which again, I think is really, really handy. And finally, you have this utility that helps you set up your environment much, much quicker. All right, guys, so thank you so much. That's it for this update, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.